We've got some fresh new young talent doing some things that I know you haven't heard before.
1, 2, 3, listen.
Welcome to Finances, your home for all things financial, investment, money and lifestyle. Hosted and curated by the very talented team of certified financial planners, Burke Britton Financial Partners.
Well, you've almost completed all of the backstory for Robin before we've even started the podcast. But Robin, thanks for coming in and enjoying. We haven't enjoyed it yet because we haven't started. But your first podcast, you said before that you don't really listen to podcasts. Is that right?
No, very seldom do.
Okay, well, you have to listen to your own podcast here on the Burke Britton podcast. Listen, we're really thankful for you coming in today. The way we always like to start our podcast before we sort of get into our topic is sort of start with a bit of a background and an origin story of everyone that comes on. And
who do you think you are?
Yeah, I think that's it. Maybe PB, do you want to start? Maybe delving. You're probably the person in this business that's closest to Robin, and you can delve a little bit into the origin story. Peter, whenever I ask Peter a story or ask him to go back in time, he always goes like way back. He goes right back to his grandfather's grandfather. Maybe we won't go that far.
I won't go quite that far, I promise. Well, I guess very quickly, Robin and Russell we became, first got to know Russ when engineering business. I was helping look after doing the company superannuation for way back, I think, of almost in the GIO days, pre-PB Financial Solutions, Burke Britton, I think. And then when Russ decided to retire, Robin and Russ came on board as private clients, which would have to be 20 years, I reckon.
22, actually.
There you go. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I actually did a little bit of digging too. I think I got back to as early as 2005.
It goes beyond
right.
that.
Yeah, there might have been sort of some interactions before that. But
so I suppose that's our, and I guess we have links. It's funny, I was showing to Cameron yesterday in our chat that with Russ, went to Cody's mum's funeral. It was a fair few years ago now, and this bloke pats me on the shoulder and says hello. It was Russ, who was best mates with Melanie's old man, Melanie's dad. So that was as we go back, without even knowing it, we go back a long way. But yourself, Robin, where were you born? You know, what's your background? You told us before that you're a twin, so give us a bit of an overview of who you are.
And the closest hospital to where we lived was at Lismore in the Western District. We actually lived at Derrenallum, and that's where my childhood was till I was 15 or so. And we had a holiday house at Ocean Grove, and my parents decided that we should come to Geelong and finish our schooling. But we'd gone to little primary school at Derrenallum, and then we went to high school at Camperdown, but very few girls in particular went beyond what was then the intermediate.
Yeah, Year 9, Year 10 or thereabouts.
Year 10, yeah. And so now we... so we came down to Geelong,
I
to
think
Ocean
that
Grove.
might be your phone.
Was that my
ringing,
phone?
Robin?
Yeah, so we came down to Ocean Grove to live then, which was a big change for my parents. My father had a garage in Derrenallum, and in those days, in 1930s, 40s, 50s, the garage man didn't just fix cars; they fixed everything that had to be fixed. Yeah. And then at Ocean Grove, he built another garage down there, and we went to school at Morongo our last 2 years.
I was about to ask you. I had a thought it was Morongo, and that's a long way back. Morongo, up on top of the road hill there.
That's right.
That's
exactly.
now where my children go.
Do they go there?
That's right, now Cardinia College.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it was good, and in fact, I did science subjects. And they didn't have a science lab at Morongo, and they didn't teach physics at Morongo. So I did physics and chemistry at Geelong College.
Oh wow!
Way before girls were in college. Yeah.
That's good sharing of facilities, though. That happens a lot these days, but it was quite rare back then, I'm sure.
Yes, there weren't many of us did that.
So you finished school at Moronga. You went through and did year 12.
Yes, yeah.
What happened after year 12? Where did you take your science knowledge from year 12 onwards?
I went to Emily Macpherson College and did dietetics there, trained as a dietitian, and finally finished my training at the Royal Melbourne Hospital. Came back to Geelong then and to work at the Geelong Hospital, and then met my first husband and worked for a while doing that. And he was a severe and unstable diabetic who was losing his eyesight. And so we bought, because he could no longer see the blackboard and things like that, and so we bought Kirrawal Court. And we worked there for 5 years.
That's the south end of Paco, isn't it? Kirrawal Court, is that right?
Yeah, big old reception house,
Yes,
Prospect Road. Yeah. And then he wasn't at all well, and we retired then to Bowen Heads.
Good spot.
Flinders
I
Parade.
recommend it.
I just loved that down there. I just loved it. But he died, and for a year I actually went overseas to Corfu with my little kids. They were only They were 2, 4 and 6.
Sorry, excuse my ignorance. Corfu, whereabouts is Corfu?
That's a Greek island where Mrs. Durrell went. Do you know? You don't know the Durrell story?
No, do I need to hear? I think we should hear that story.
Better. I don't know that one either. So
don't you?
No.
Gerald Durrells wrote a book, My Family and Other Animals.
Okay.
And his mother, when she was left on her own with children, went to Corfu.
Okay.
And I've read the book and thought, I'll do that.
I better get that book. I better add that to my pile, I think.
There's a television program on, has been on.
So that was the motivation to go. You'd read the book and thought,
yep, just
sounds
do
fun.
it.
Let's
do it. Yep.
Wonderful. What a great experience for your 3 kids too.
My mother came with me, which was fantastic. She was on her own by then. And it was just a fantastic experience.
And so that was 1 year. 1 year in Corfu,
we were away.
And then you were back. You mentioned before we were recording about living in Merrijig for a while. Did I miss that? Was that?
No, that was after that.
We're getting to that. Okay.
Yeah, after I came home, I thought, what can I do with 3 little kids? And the best thing to do would be teaching. So I did a dip ed and was teaching home economics. And it was just too hard. It was just too hard. And so I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll buy Kirrawal Court again. So I went back and bought that and did worked at that for another 5 years.
I can't imagine that'd be easier than teaching, running a convention function place.
Wedding receptions.
Yeah,
no, it was a happy place to work.
Okay.
It was a happy place to work. And the staff were all your friends, you know, and you were working from home.
Yeah.
So the kids, we lived there. It was a beautiful
You're in
old
control
home.
of your own time, which helps. Yeah.
It just worked beautifully,
Right.
really. Yeah. And then after that, I got a job at Deakin University, and my last 10 years of working was as a lecturer out there in the nutrition department under various people.
Enjoyed that?
Yeah. That was, I think probably that was my favourite work of all. Everyone's, they're all interesting people, and there's interesting work to do, and the students are enthusiastic, and it was a really good place to work.
Lovely. And when did you meet Russ?
There we go.
How did you meet Russ?
We met Russ at church.
Yeah.
We belonged to St David's in Newtown, where my mother and his mother both attended, and we knew each other for years before actually we got together.
Yep.
Yeah. And that happened about late 1990s, I think. We married in the year 2000. and the rest history.
So were
History.
you working? Were you working still at Deakin when you met Russell, or not?
No, I'd retired,
Okay.
and he was still working, and I did a couple of consultancies after I finished full-time work, but basically then we moved up to Merrijig, and it was just Geelong was a bit too small for us, with our own different families and things, and it was just easier to be away. And my twin sister had moved to Mansfield shortly before that, so we headed that direction and found a gorgeous place on the Delatite River at Merrijig. And so we had nearly 15 gorgeous years up there.
I haven't really heard about Russell's work life, but you looked after Russell's, or the company super at Russell's engineering firm. Is that right?
Yeah,
So
just trying to think. What was it? You can help me. I'm trying to recall the name of the business.
Purdey and Partners.
Purdey and Partners. That's what it was. Purdey and Partners. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also the other thing, which is very interesting with Russ, was his passion for the little what do they call the little microlights?
Trike.
Yeah.
Nickname. Yeah.
Oh my goodness me! And that was, he would tell stories about getting up in the microlights, and finally realised it was probably a little bit dangerous, and there was a point in time where you should stop doing it. But that was
We had great trips in those. The only thing about it was cold.
Cold.
It was freezing flying in that little thing.
Yeah.
We wore the suits that people wear working in freezers, you know, and you unrecognisable because you're so covered in clothes.
And many layers underneath.
Layers and layers.
how did he find that hobby?
Look, he actually started off, I think, at Benalla doing, tried gliding, but that didn't work out, and he actually had a brother who was killed in a gliding accident. And so then somewhere he came across microlights, and they were flying out of Bowen Heads, at the little aerodrome there at Bowen Heads.
Yep.
No pilot's license needed for a
Absolutely.
hydrolight?
Oh, no, yes, you do.
You do? Okay.
Very, very strict
regulated.
training and
Yes.
regulated.
Is it a hydrolight specific license, or it's
microlight?
what did I say?
Hydro.
Oh,
You're thinking about the drink.
nothing to do with water.
I'm thinking nutrition.
No. Look, I can't tell you exactly. It was before we got together. It was one of the first things he did, come and fly with me. Yeah, so yeah, we did. It was
It's not
good
a bad
fun.
string to your bow to be able to say, "Hey, do you want to come for a fly?"
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And again, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you may have been living up there, and Russ was still commuting backwards and forwards a bit with work. Was that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
Because I know, we were doing a lot of the planning, but you were living up there. You had Merrijig, and Russ would come backwards and forwards before he fully retired.
That's right. He worked. He'd come down on a Monday morning and come home Thursday night. So we had a long weekend every weekend. I did my own thing. Started doing a writing course, and he was. And every weekend we had together, and with friends and relations, and yeah, it was a lovely time.
You've had a couple of your pieces of work published, haven't you?
I have had a
Yeah.
couple of little bits published.
Yeah, some nice stuff. I think somewhere in my book collection, I think I've got at least one or two of the books that you've done.
I've had a couple of. Actually, there were very bad bushfires up there in 1906-07.
You did that? Did you do that as a fundraising
And we
exercise?
did. Yes,
Is that right?
we wrote a book, Wildfire in the High Country.
That's it. That's all I've got.
Yeah, and it was a fundraiser, and we did raise quite a lot of money. I can't remember now, like $10,000 or something.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It was
nice to
fantastic.
Do something that you've got a passion for, to be helping in a very practical sense people that needed it.
Bushfire is something that was it always I was very conscious of because we were burnt out in Derranallum when we were only 5. It's my first vivid memory of that day. Our father was at the war, and my mother didn't drive. We were dependent on other people to take us out of the place, and virtually the whole town was burnt. Yeah.
Terrifying.
I can remember driving along. We had to get to Camperdown. That was the way to go. And there were sheep that had been driven into the paddock with their wool on fire.
Oh,
You just
wow.
don't forget things
No.
like that, do you? I can see it.
As a
Yeah.
child, that's, that's
5-year-old.
nightmare stuff.
Yeah,
My goodness.
5-year-old. Yeah. So this wildfire in the high country, I really enjoyed writing that book. But
So Merrijig, your property at Merrijig was, obviously would have been very vigilant about making it as fire safe as possible.
that's right. Yeah.
Lots of fire break around and nothing much growing close
Well-
to your home if you could avoid it.
Well, the river was only 50 metres away.
That's handy.
Which was really good, and so the pump was always there in the summer.
Yeah.
And we had deciduous trees that don't burn, that were closer to the house, big old elm trees and things like that. Yeah.
I suppose Merrijig and living up there, and obviously you loved the place. It was somewhere that you were passionately happy living in, but probably leads to the context of our conversation about moving to as we age and we are capable of doing less and starting to think about, sadly for yourself, the necessity of, with Russ having recently gone into aged care. So you got to a point and you were with a lot of family still in Geelong, both yours and Russ's kids, your stepkids, blah, blah, blah. And also the need to maintain that place in Merrijig and being so far from important facilities, important health services.
I think that's right. And Peter, at the time, it was becoming apparent that Russ wasn't really as well as he should be. Yeah. And there were other reasons to come to Geelong. My son was needing lung transplants and my daughter was a marriage breakup and Russ not well. We just had to think what our future was going to look like. Yeah.
To give that some context in terms of time, how long ago was that, the move from Merrijig back to Geelong?
6.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 6.5 years.
Back to Torquay.
Back to Torquay. Yeah. Well, I do like the beach.
The river or the beach?
Well, I need to be near water.
Yeah.
And if it's water you can hear, we could hear the river
Lovely.
rippling along and we can hear the sea, Torquay. I'm not sure that I'll hear waves down on the waterfront now at my new place, but anyway.
Yeah, we're just jumping around a bit. It's just given, and we'll talk through it, but
Yeah.
given the circumstances with Russ having to go into aged care, you've chosen to move back in from Torquay to be in town closer to, so you can visit Russ regularly, easily at Gracie's.
That's right.
But we're really pleased for you that you found a place very close to Eastern Beach, so you'll still be able to get your walks and
And I'll still be able to see the sea.
you'll see it. Yeah, it's a lovely view looking out that window of yours that you showed us yesterday. Fantastic. Obviously, that decision about needing to make that move and thinking about, obviously not thinking about aged care, but at that point in time, what were some of the fears? Like, what are again, you can tell from your perspective when you're thinking about, like you could see Russ wasn't well, things were not quite like they should be, and thinking about, well, we can't cope with Merrijig, we've got to come back to Geelong, the family reasons as well. But what were the fears about what might the future hold in terms of the possibility of needing more high-level care?
Well, at the time I really didn't know what the problem was with Russ, and all I knew was that we had to be somewhere where he needed a doctor that could find out what the problem was. He was forgetting things. He was at a meeting where he'd been in Rotary, he'd been in church councils and things, and at a meeting he would suddenly say something that was totally irrelevant, and people at the meeting would be saying, what was that? And just little things at home. He always needed to know where I was. He'd be calling out for me if I was not where he needed to be. And it just, I just thought I've got to get some better attention, and so, and we're not young anymore. We're in our late 70s by this time, and you can't. Things do go wrong when you get older, and fortunately I was still well, but he clearly wasn't. He was starting to shake.
Yeah.
and you think, what's that about? It was anyway. So we made the move at that stage, and it was the right time as it happened, and so he was. We actually went away for a holiday not long after we came. It had been pre-arranged with friends up to Noosa, and the move to Torquay and then having a holiday in a totally different place, he completely lost it. And so we flew home and immediately got help and went to the memory clinic out at McKellar House, and they diagnosed immediately with Parkinson's disease with the associated dementia that goes with that. Yeah.
Pretty confronting for you.
Oh, well, you don't know anything about these things. Where do you go to find out, And there are groups that you can contact and are helpful. Yep. But it's a big learning curve, And he understood always that he had Parkinson's disease, but I don't think he ever, and still doesn't really understand that it's affected his mind at the same time.
Well, I guess that's probably an element of the condition, isn't it?
I think so.
Having that cognizance of what is actually going on, because that's one of the problems, is that's one of the health issues he's dealing with.
That's right. And it made him very anxious because he couldn't think, what's happening next? What are we doing now? Where are we going now? Who are we going with? Who are we going to see? He knew if we were coming to see Peter Burke. But even yesterday when I was with him and Cameron said we'd been to see Peter, he nodded. Yeah, he remembered.
Hard to forget this ugly grey head.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, I think that, and again, with a number of family members, and my mum, Joe's pop, and Esther's mum, that transition when you go from being quite functional, and there's a fair time frame from there to when you really don't remember much, and you're not much cognitively functional at all, and that sort of annoyance and disappointment in yourself because you don't remember the frustrations that you're wanting to know, and you know that this is not quite right. So the awareness that it's not right is that really tough period. And I can't say what it was like for you and Russ, but I have some empathy around what that must have
Russ,
been like.
After he was diagnosed and got treatment, for a couple of years we really managed quite well. But then a couple of years ago it really was becoming more obvious to everyone as well as me. And then, of course, there was COVID. So we were, at home alone, just the two of us, in a very simple routine. And so we managed, on a fairly level plane.
Consistency.
Yeah, yes. And that sort of worked quite well. But about last Christmas... he's really deteriorated since then. Yeah. At Christmas time, we'd gone to family in Bendigo, and that was when some of the family saw how very different he was. Yeah. He managed to pour his beer into his dinner, and things that which he'd done at home a couple of times, but it's not normal, is it?
No,
it's not normal.
It's not. It's accepted normal behaviour. No, don't waste a beer.
Exactly. For goodness sake, what would you do that for? Anyway.
Yeah.
So
Robin, did you at any point in time make use of the home care packages before the obviously the hot?
We did.
Yeah. And that process, how did you find navigating that? And what were the
Well, again, it's a learning curve, isn't it? We had someone came to visit us. We had to fill out all the forms, and they assessed, do you really need this? And in fact, they recommended that we do a level 3
straight away.
Straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, we only got level 2 for a while, but it took 18 months for that to come through.
I'm pleased that was one of my questions or one of the comments. The time frame is prohibitive, isn't it? It is just incredibly difficult,
Very
especially when
difficult.
you know that you want that support. So to say, yep, it's time, we're going to start the process. But I guess just a step back from that too, one of the things that we would like to encourage conversations like this and people thinking about it, don't wait until your partner or the parent or your person who's suffering is in need. As soon as you think there's any signs, let's get the initiation of that home care package process started, because the time frame is terrible.
So long.
Yeah.
Well, when they first assessed us and said, level 3 and you can have this, this and this, I thought, oh no, I don't need that. I think I'll say no thanks. And people said, don't be stupid.
Don't be silly, exactly. Help take it if it's there, and that's we talk about that a lot. But the home care package, it's I guess it's difficult to accept that I need help. It's, for yourself, I don't really need someone to come in. But as the deterioration of your partner or your elderly parent, whoever we're talking about in this situation, as that deterioration occurs, if you've got that help, it allows you to spend more time doing the hands-on caring stuff, which is difficult enough in itself. And rather than saying I don't really need it, and again, there's a massive economic benefit to the providers, our federal government providers of these fundings, because they want to keep people in home with home care packages as long as they can, because it's a damn sight cheaper than putting them into full-time aged care.
Yes, I'm sure that's right.
And so, again, what we're trying to, this conversation with you today, don't wait too long to start the process with home care. If you think it might be needed, let's have a chat. Let's start, get the paperwork sorted, get the visits done, get yourself classified. And then when it's offered to you, which will be some months, significantly long time after you get accepted, say yes, please. Thank you very much. I'll take it.
That's exactly what happened, because really I didn't think, I can clean the house. I know how to do toilets. I enjoy a bit of gardening, but I can't clean windows. I didn't want to clean the spouts. And these are the things that Russ used to be able to do, and you don't even think about it. But suddenly they need doing, and you can't do it, and he can't do it. And so this is where, it wasn't, we didn't make as much use of the home care package as some people did, but if you needed a gardener, if you need some hedges trimmed, when he wasn't safe anymore to use a hedge trimmer, or cleaning, as I say, cleaning spouts, things like that, you just can't manage yourself.
It's invaluable support.
And the regular housekeeper who came was an excellent bloke. He was terrific. And the other thing that happened was that even during COVID, he was able to take Russ out for a drive, and for him to have company with another bloke rather than just me all the time. And that was a huge help. And Russ said, would you like to come too? I said, no, the idea is you go with this fellow and I have some time with it on my own.
A little respite.
There's a win-win, isn't there? Because Russ gets a chance to have a chat with someone else, which is good for a stimulation for him. But it also gives you a breather.
And that was a couple of hours every week, and I'd look forward to that. I didn't have to make lunch that day.
Small benefits.
Yeah, that's right.
The flow on to all of that, and again, probably leading question, and because we went through this process in advance, the uncertainty of what the cost of going into the full-time care and all the various costs that are involved. Can you sort of talk through the fact, when we started talking about the possibilities, doing some preliminary planning, doing some numbers in advance, how did that help, and what was that? Why was that important for you way before you chose to put Russ into care?
Peter, that was hugely important. Honestly, Peter, unless you do it, you have no idea what's required. And I look back this morning actually at some notes that I've got, and it was the 8th of June, And I'd been to see about getting respite for us. No, we were thinking first we'd just do respite,
Yes.
and I looked up, and the contract of the aged care place for doing respite was 34 pages long. I can't deal with this.
Well, on top of everything else,
On top of
that's
everything,
pretty confronting,
because
isn't it?
well, the thing is that you've delayed longer than some people, like my twin sister said. Rob, for goodness sake, you need a break. You know?
Yes.
And I said, no, I'm all right. We're okay. I'm okay. No, you need a break. And so I thought, well, I'll find out about respite care for a start. And as I say, 34 pages, the contract thing came. And you know, what you have to pay and what rate it is and how you've got to let Centrelink know. There's a whole form from Centrelink. For goodness sake, I had no idea that this was the sort of thing that was required.
Yeah, I think about that layered on top of sort of the emotional aspect of dealing with a loved one. And like you said, when you originally moved from Mary Jig back to Geelong or the coast, to have Russ close to sort of medical care, then you add on top of that the sort of the financial administration burden of thinking, how do I make all this work? How do I make sure that it's funded appropriately? And that, as Peter and I did a podcast last week, we released it last week, and that was one of the things that we really wanted to emphasise, that for people not to underestimate just how much of a load, both personally, emotionally, and then administratively, to actually work through advice and work through the process of moving into either home care packages or then into aged care. It should not be downplayed.
No, and I have a friend who her husband had done the same sort of thing, and she didn't tell me you've got to do all this. She didn't talk about RADs and goodness knows what. I had no idea, honestly, no idea, because quite quickly after Russ was in respite care, it became clear that he would have to go into permanent care, which, you know, he was in hospital at the time, and the decision was virtually made for me at that point.
Yeah.
But then when you start and look at what's required to go into permanent care, if I thought 34 pages was a bit much for respite, it's just huge, yes. Yeah. And there was no way I could have done that on my own, no way. Because, you know, you're suddenly faced with this, you know, what do you call RAD? Refundable
accommodation deposit. Yeah.
Where am I going to find that sort of money?
Yeah.
You know, do we have that sort of money? What's invested, what's available, what's not available? You know, I had no idea. So that's when I handed it straight over to Peter.
And again, one of the pleasures we have in the job we are very lucky and privileged to do is that we know, we've lots of experience with people like yourself and Russ, that we know we can pick that stuff up and take one of those huge burdens that weighs people down. And if you are trying to deal with all the emotional angst of the circumstances you're in and the decisions you're having to make personally, health-wise, it's for us to take that one big piece of that worry bucket off your lap and try and manage it for you. It's a privilege for us to be able to do that. And, you know, we don't downplay, yes, it's complex, yes, it's quite significant, but when you've done a fair bit of it and you know, we jump into the modelling tools, we run the numbers, I come back to you and say, well, this is how we can manage. We won't be able to pay all the RAD, but the onset or the extra bit that's left over will be manageable from a cash flow perspective, blah, blah, blah. And we look at the means tested fee and the base fee, all the bits and pieces, and coming back and giving you some clarity around, you'll still be able to survive, Robin. You will have enough income to meet your needs.
I can still have a coffee.
And Russ will be really well cared for. You'll be able to put him in the best care you possibly can, but it won't mean that you economically will be in a really bad state.
And that was, it was a worry, because you know people who've had to sell their house or do other things, and I'm thinking, I've got no idea really. how that's all going to work, and so it's just such a help to know that, and to reassure the family as well, because they need to know that their father's looked after. My family need to know that I'm okay, and so it's just so important.
And a small extension to that, you mentioned family, and I think this is something else that we would promote very, very positively. You yesterday came in to sit down with us with your stepson Cameron, Ross's son Cameron, and I think that was probably one of the best little chats we've had, because I was able to, and I was able to talk to both of you at the same time about the benefits for Russ, how we were funding things, the benefits for you, how you would be afterwards. And I felt, and I don't know because I wasn't there afterwards talking to Cameron, but I felt the meeting was really positive, and so he's able to take back to his siblings that their dad is going to be really well cared for, but it's not going to destroy their stepmum, you, Robin, in the process. And I think that comfort, and the more we can have conversations with family members during this period of time as well, because clarity and understanding is so important, because it removes worries that are not necessarily there.
I think because you're not only a financial advisor but a friend, I feel, Peter, that was excellent, because at first I was a bit offended that Cameron had even thought he needed to get that information from my financial advisor. But in fact it couldn't have been better, because he's happy about it all, which we talked about afterwards. We went and had a cup of coffee downstairs here, and he says any money that gets put in all comes back to me. He was absolutely adamant that was going to happen, which I don't want even, but he was absolutely adamant that would happen, and he was so glad that you're a qualified financial planner, not just fly-by-night fellow.
Bloke at the barbecue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so all in all, it couldn't have been better. And Russ's family have been great, and I sort of always was anxious that they might have thought I could have done more. Russ doesn't need to go into this. Dad doesn't need to go into care yet, does he? But no, they all know that the time was ready.
And that's understandable that you have those reservations. It's understandable that you have those concerns, because number one, you don't want to let Russ down. You don't want to let yourself down by feeling you haven't done everything that you possibly can, and that is a horrible emotional burden to carry. And I can't possibly, I can't quantify it, and I can only sympathise with where you're at. But I think, really important is the family around you, yours and Russ's, your stepkids respectively. If they know that you are doing all you can, they'll be more supportive of you putting Russ into care, knowing that it's necessary, and it's necessary for you as much as it is for us. And it's a horribly tough time. I can't possibly, can't comprehend it.
It has been hard, Peter, but then, working out what to do next, that next step for me has been just a little light at the end of a dark tunnel. Being able to get a smaller place of my own that I know I'll be able to manage easily, and that I'll be closer to Russ. It's all worked out for the best in the long run.
It was lovely when I got that message from you that, oops, this has happened quickly, but I think I found a place I wouldn't mind closer to where Russ is. My first thoughts were, Robin, I hope you're doing this for the right reasons for you. And after I had a 10-minute conversation with you, I was so reassured that you had just found a place you loved. It was going to be perfect for you, and it would make life easier with your commuting backwards and forwards to Russ. And the outcome is right, and it's working. We just need to get Torquay sold so it can all fall into place for you.
Yes, and that of course goes to the next step, where I now need you, Peter, as my financial advisor again.
It's funny, I was making a couple of notes around like a couple of things that you both said around relationships, the importance of, you called Peter a friend, and it's amazing how many of our clients speak, well, I won't speak about myself, but speak about Peter in that same way. And I think that the two really important things, regardless of the the type of advice or planning that we're giving is the importance of a relationship. I mean, how many times do we say that financial planning is not really financial planning? It's much more around the relationships and lifestyle planning.
Lifestyle, exactly. Yeah.
And the other thing I think you mentioned, Peter, around the importance of just sort of that communication and understanding. When we're informed, we're able to make better decisions. When people understand what the process is, and I think the earlier we can start that process and have good relationships, again, relationships build over time. So the earlier you can go out and, if you don't have an advisor or someone that can support you, start to build those bridges of support, and also make sure that you've got someone in your corner that can help sort of disseminate the myriad of contracts and terminology that inevitably comes your way. But it's nice to be a little fly on the wall in this conversation and hear sort of the relationship that the two of you and Russell have had over what is now 20 years, and how it's evolved in such a positive way to help both you and Russell and your kids to be able to be at ease with the situation.
And I think that's another thing that's important. I mean, we're not wealthy. We don't have heaps of money, but the money that you've got, you want to use to the best, make it work for you as well as it possibly can. And so my kids, who have even less, still benefit from having advice from people like you and Ben.
Yes.
The third thing that I forgot to mention, which I think you both mentioned, was around the importance of involving family. Like you said, we're very encouraging of people to include their sort of their beneficiaries or their executors in conversations, because it can just help sort of demystify and make sure that everyone is on the same page. So it's a really important part of the whole process.
Yeah, and just we're probably close to winding up, but the conversation we had with your stepson Cameron yesterday, it's great because in those sorts of conversations there'll be different questions or different angles of questions that will come from the other party, and it lets all of us sitting around the table enrich our awareness of what's going on, and it lets me provide answers at a different level, because a different question comes as one that you may not have thought of, but when Cameron asks a question, it triggers something in your mind that will help you to understand something a bit better. So that around the table, I use the Indigenous analogy of yarning, sitting around the campfire and having a yarn. Our beautiful Indigenous people did that very well for tens of thousands of years, and not bring a preconceived idea to the table, just bring thoughts. And then with curiosity, listen to your thoughts, and then walk away with a much, much broader, richer view of what you might be able to do, because you've actually absorbed other people's ideas. You haven't gone in with, this is the way it's going to be done and this is the answer. Like you take a different perspective. So.
And it helps always, because Russ's kids I've always got on well with, but Cameron has been a very busy young man.
Yes.
And I've never talked one-on-one. There's always family around.
Yeah.
And just a couple of times lately, because of this, I've really had to sit and we've had a couple of cups of coffee now, and for an hour or so had really good talks, which I haven't done at all. Yeah.
It's marvellous how crisis creates an opportunity, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
And relationships matter.
Oh, they sure
absolutely do. Yeah, absolutely.
You had a closing question there, Peter, which I think is a nice way to wrap up our conversation.
Yeah, just from you and your perspective of what you've been through and where you're at now, Robin, over the last few years with all of the emotionally difficult times and where you're now moving to some clarity around what's going on, your advice for other people, with partners or elderly parents who are in a similar situation to what you've been through, what would be, just in a handful of sentences, your advice to those people?
Look, I would say that it's really important to talk. It's really important to talk to your family, to know that you can't do it on your own, that you need help from professionals like yourself. You need help from medical people, and you you need to be able to talk to the family so they know where you're at, because I think for a while, I tried to think everything was fine, and it's not always fine. And so I think we need to know that, as I say, know that we can't do it on our own, that we do need the support of our relations and friends, people who've had that experience before, and professional people, because you just know that emotionally you're going to be stretched, which you think you're coping, but suddenly you're awake at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're not coping as well as you thought you were. And so I think that's really important. Yeah.
And maybe one leading question to try and close out. If you're able to do some of the discussions and help have the planning done earlier before you need it, would that have helped with some of that waking up at 3 in the morning stuff, if even taking it back 6 or 12 months earlier to start looking at the financial implications? What might it look like if we start earlier? Would that help remove some of that worry issue?
I think I probably knew that in time I would need to have Russ in care, that the time would probably come because of his disease that I wouldn't be able to manage. But if I'd known earlier what a RAD meant, for example,
yes,
then probably that would have helped. So that you're doing that sort of financial bit of it, which is a burden if you don't understand it all.
Yeah.
That could be planned before the emotional
Perfect. Yep.
time came, when you're trying to do two things at once. You're trying to cope with all the stress of and unhappiness and grief actually that comes with that decision to make.
Massively.
As well as the financial stuff that you really don't understand and haven't had to deal with before. Yeah.
I think that's perfect. I think, our very much our advocacy about this is to say, just because you start doing numbers and planning on what it might look like doesn't mean you're making a decision. It doesn't mean you're committing to put your partner, your parent into care. It just means that you're saying, well, let's get some of that knowledge and awareness now so that when the time comes, I won't have all of those worry bag stuff. I won't have all those things sitting there weighing me down.
It's like making a will. You don't
do
think
it when
you're
you
going
don't
to
need it.
Exactly.
It's not a problem until it's a problem.
Exactly.
Yeah, perfect.
Well, I think that's a great way to wrap things up. Robin, thank you so much for sharing your time with us this morning. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing a bit more of your backstory, and like having been a client of ours and Peter's for a number of years, I'm always curious and interested in people's history and where they came from, and I've loved the conversation and loved the light you've been able to shed on your experience. So thank you so much for joining us on your first podcast.
And Robin, when I asked you, I was whether you would be interested or prepared, I was very accepting of the fact that you may have said, it's a bit raw for me at the moment, I don't think I can. So I want to say a massive thank you for the honesty and the upfrontness, and the fact that it's a very emotional time for you. You've only just recently had to put your husband into care. But from our perspective, that's even more valuable for an education of lots of others, because it was so real, it was so raw, and I can't thank you enough. It's wonderful, thank you, and it's been a beautiful conversation that we've had this morning. It was terrific.
And I've no doubt that it's going to be very
talk about it.
valuable for many people that listen to this out there and maybe in a similar situation or leading up to a similar situation. So again, Robin, thank you very much.
That's all right. You can edit out the bits that don't sound so good.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're keen to understand more about how financial advice could benefit you, follow us on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter at Burke Britton FP, or Google Burke Britton Financial Partners. Check out our client reviews, testimonials, and make a time to meet one of our certified financial planners by clicking Book Now on our website. Thanks for listening.
Any information contained in this podcast is of a general nature only. No account was taken as to the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. Therefore, before making any decision, listeners should consider the appropriateness of any information with regard to their particular objective, financial situation, needs, and seek independent advice from a licensed professional specific to their circumstances.
That translates to don't be a moron and act on what some random person says on a podcast. Take personal responsibility, do your homework, ask questions, and speak to an actual human that knows what they're talking about before you do anything. PB Financial Solutions Proprietary Limited, trading as Burke Britton Financial Partners, are authorised representatives of AMP Financial Planning Limited, AFS, licence number 232706.